Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the considerations that go into whether or not to purchase a vehicle versus leasing a vehicle. We'll look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of each of those decisions and help you sort of think through some of the considerations that go into making that purchase or lease decision. So first off, when we're looking at buying a car or leasing a car, we need to make sure that we understand that we have to choose between a temporary possession, that's a lease, and a permanent possession, which is a purchase. When you're leasing a car, what you do is sign a contract that lays out how much you're going to pay each month and what you are and are not allowed to do with the car. Specifically, they limit you on how many miles you can drive, but you're also limited in terms of any sort of upgrades you want to make to the car, like changing a radio or changing the rims or something like that. You're limited from being able to do that when you're leasing a car. And the agreement that you sign lays out all of the things that you can and cannot do with the dealer's vehicle. As long as you meet or maintain the terms, you're allowed to keep the car. If you start violating those terms, then fees will begin to apply and you could lose possession of the vehicle. And with the lease, you don't keep anything. So once the lease is done, you have to trade the car back into the dealership and presumably get another vehicle and lease yet another vehicle for 3 years or 4 years in order to maintain the ability to drive, because you don't own anything at the end of the lease. Your time to borrow it is up and you have to start borrowing another car. Or you can purchase the car outright. That requires a large payment at the end. When we're dealing with cars, we have to remember that they are depreciating assets. A depreciating asset is one that loses its value over time. And so cars are worth less 4 years from now than when I purchased them, even a year from now from when I purchased it. And this is the opposite of what we call an appreciating asset, which is one that gains value over time, like your house, which typically is worth more next year or 3 years from now than it was when you purchased it. And now that's important to keep in mind, because when you purchase the car will be worth less over time, and that can be an issue, especially if you're going to finance your vehicle by paying off a loan. You're going to be spending a lot of money and owe a lot of money on a car that may not be worth as much as you still owe. Because vehicles depreciate in value, when you're trying to decide whether to purchase one or not, you have to decide whether to purchase new or used. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but just as a general idea, knowing that the vehicle depreciates over time, buying new may not be the best value for your money, because a car does lose, on some cases, up to 27 or 30% of its value over the course of the first year. And then the amount of value that the car loses declines year after year after that. So the car's still losing value, but not as at fast a rate as in the first 1 or 2 years of ownership. And so if you're sort of looking for the best value for your money, oftentimes a 3-year-old used car is about the right age to take advantage of a good, reliable, relatively new car without having to lose a lot of value that you're paying for. So when you're trying to make that decision about whether to own the car or lease the car, there are a number of considerations to take into account. The first is ownership. When you buy the car, you own it. But when you lease it, you're just borrowing it. So it's the leasing company still maintains ownership of the vehicle. You own nothing. When it comes to costs, we look at upfront costs and monthly payments. Upfront, to buy a new vehicle, you typically need a down payment. You need to be able to pay your taxes, registration, and fees associated with the purchase. When you lease, you're also going to need to make a down payment, essentially the first month's payment, plus a security deposit in order to take the vehicle. So you have to keep that in mind and make sure you have enough resources to make essentially 2 months worth of payments up front when you're leasing. The monthly payments on a new car tend to be higher than when you lease. The average monthly payment for a new car is about $400. The average monthly payment for a lease is about $300. And so you find that on a per month basis, leasing tends to be the least expensive option for vehicles. Long term, it tends to be the most expensive option for vehicles because you're always making payments and will make payments for as long as you need a vehicle and as long as you're leasing one. At least when you buy new, you might make higher payments over the first several months of ownership, but once it's paid off, you don't have to pay anything to continue to drive. There is no limitation on early termination. That is, if you buy a new car, you can sell it tomorrow if you want. You can sell, trade pretty much any time you want. But when you lease, you're locked in. You can not get out of your lease without having to pay a fee, and so you're stuck with the car for 3 years or 4 years or however long your lease is. When it comes to returning your vehicle, when you own your vehicle, you can do whatever you want. You can sell it, you can trade it, but when its life is over with you, you have to dispose of it. Whereas with leasing, if you don't want to deal with selling cars or anything like that, you don't have to, because you just simply turn in your vehicle to your leasing agency and walk away, and you're not responsible for dealing with it at the end of the lease. So there's a lot less headache involved in that regard when you lease compared to when you buy new. When it comes to future value, one of the nice things about buying a car is that it has a future value. There is depreciation, but you can sell it and take the cash and keep the cash for yourself and put it towards the purchase of another vehicle. Whereas with leasing, you have no future value. It's not your car. So you don't have to worry about depreciation or the loss in value to the vehicle, but then again, you can't sell it and take cash and apply it to another vehicle in the future. With the model years, one of the things to keep in mind is when you buy new, you're sort of stuck. And you could be stuck with a car, or not stuck, but you could keep your car for 10, 15, 20 years. And it's a 10, 15, or 20-year-old car, which may not be as exciting to you as if you lease. Because when you lease, you always have a newer model year. It's always a 2 or 3-year-old car at most. It's always the freshest and newest technology, and some people really enjoy that and are willing to pay the price for it. So you need to keep that in mind. Is having a new car pretty frequently a big deal to you? If it's not, buying may make more sense than leasing. When it comes to mileage, buying a new car means you can drive as many miles as you want. There's no one to say you have to stop. You can put as many miles as you wish and go anywhere you want at any time. But when you're leasing, you are limited to a certain amount of mileage. Otherwise, you have to pay a per mile fee for extra wear and tear on your vehicle. So that does sort of limit your ability to go places and do things when you're borrowing somebody else's car through a lease. Also with customization, you can do whatever you want to your car. You want to change the radio out, change the radio. You want to get rims, get rims. You want to put in new speakers, put in new speakers. You can do whatever you like because it's your car. But with the lease, you're stuck with whatever equipment it's equipped with. There are no modifications allowed. And then one thing to keep in mind is at the end of the whole term, when you're done making payments, if you choose to finance a car, you're done. There are no more payments into the future until you sell the car and purchase something new. When you lease, you will always have payments, and it will continue on for the rest of your life. When you choose to purchase a vehicle, you need to make the decision to whether or not you want a used vehicle or a new vehicle. And there are some considerations to take into account. For the used vehicle, they tend to be less expensive both in total cost and taxes and processing. But you're going to have to pay more in repairs because not every used vehicle is covered by a warranty. New cars have a warranty. They tend to be 5 or 10-year warranties that can cover anywhere between 60 and 120,000 miles before you're responsible for fixing things that break, especially major parts like an engine or transmission. So the used car can be more expensive on the maintenance side, whereas new cars tend to be more expensive up front on the vehicle cost, but then tend to have a higher value, especially if you sell them when they're still relatively new, and you have less to pay in repairs because most of the time you're covered by your manufacturer's warranty. Now, some warranties will transfer if you buy a used car and they haven't used up all the years of the miles, and so you need to look into that when deciding to make a purchase. One final thing to keep in mind here is trying to decide whether or not you want to buy with financing or if you want to purchase it with cash outright. And it's possible to buy a car without having to use a loan, and it may be something you want to consider. For example, if we look at a new car that's worth $34,000 at purchase, and if it's purchased with a loan at 3.11%, we'd be facing monthly payments of about $613 a month to be able to purchase that car. And after 3 years, that car would be worth about $18,000 according to the table. And that's if you chose to get a loan. If you chose to save $613 a month for 3 years, leading up to the purchase of a vehicle, you would have $22,000 in cash sitting in your account. So if you had chose to self-finance, that is, pay yourself in advance the amount that you would have paid per month on the loan, you'll have not only enough to pay for the car, but you'd have money left over because you can buy a 3-year-old version of this car for $18,360. So the question you have to answer for yourself when purchasing a car is, do you have the ability to save up money in advance to be able to purchase your car, or can you not save and then have to find that money after you make the purchase? Saving in advance makes it a whole lot less expensive, but it requires a budget and a plan, which not everybody has. At the end of the day, the decision to purchase or lease, whether to purchase through financing or with your own money, is entirely up to you and based on your current budget needs, interests, and priorities. So begin to look at what makes sense for you and make an informed decision as a consumer.